My name's TJ Blake. I'm a member of the SAB here, and I'm pretty excited to be here as a student today because these programs are a great opportunity to bring something to our campus and our community that brings a new topic of conversation almost every semester. I know that I have loved seeing this, and I hope you guys enjoy participating in it. A couple of announcements we do want to say before we actually do begin. The first thing is, if you're a person that enjoys Twitter or participates in Twitter, as you can see, we've got our Twitter feed up on our TVs here. And right now, we just have a big picture of brownies. So if you want to tweet something, anything with the hashtag Judge Joyce will pop up on the Twitter feed so everybody can kind of see what you have to say, kind of keep that discussion rolling. It also is great for the people that are watching on the live stream. If they want to participate as well, they're also able to tweet that as well. The second thing that I will say is that each week, we'll talk about many different things. The topics will change from week to week, but if there's something that you would like to see discussed, let's say there's something to do with the courts or something that kind of relates to what Judge Ford has to talk about, you can leave a comment for us. We've got a little comment box back there and say, you know, I would really like to know more about this specific topic that's related to Judge Ford's overall politics and public policy discussion group. So if you'd like to leave those comments, feel free to. We'd love to have that input. It's a discussion group after all. And so without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and introduce our director here, Bill Lacey, so that he can talk a little bit more about the program.
Thank you, TJ. Thanks to all of you for coming out today. We're so excited about our Spring Fellow. And I have to say right up front that as much as I would love to claim having personally recruited the judge, I did not do that. It was done by my colleague, Dr. Barbara Ballard. And they had run together at a couple of events, and Barbara heard the judge speak, and she came back one day and she said, wow, she would be a fabulous fellow. So we got to talking. She talked to Judge Ford and told her kind of how the program worked, and the judge submitted an application, which was fantastic. Those of you who've done these before, I see lots of old faces here and new faces as well. Okay.
Lots of old faces.
All right.
Familiar.
Can we edit this tape, Alex? I'm never going to live that one down, am I? I see lots of old friends here. That's still not quite right. I see lots of friends here. Some of you have been here before, some of you haven't. Oh, man. This is a brutal group. You guys need to be careful with this crowd. So, anyway, if you've been here before, you know we like these discussion groups to be eclectic in terms of their approach to lots of different topics. And the thing that really struck me as exciting about this topic is that we've never had anybody speaking about the judiciary before. And it's very important, and it's very timely in Kansas now, but it's important in any way. And so we were very excited to get the judge's proposal. Now, I'm going to tell you right up front, I'm going to have to really shorten her bio. This is an 8-page bio. It's extraordinarily impressive. And we have some copies. If anybody does want to read through it, we'll be happy to make a copy available. But let me just hit a few of what I thought were highlights of the judge's background. She's a remarkable public servant. Like I said, 8-page bio. Judge Ford was the first African-American woman U.S. magistrate judge in 1979. She was the first African-American chief U.S. magistrate judge appointed in 1996. She has a varied background outside of the judiciary as well. She served as a professor at Tufts University, and get this connection, she also served as a legislative assistant to former House Speaker Tip O'Neill. That's just an extraordinary background. She's been widely published. Like I say, there's a lot more in her bio I don't have time to go into today, but I wanted to mention this because at the end of her bio, she says that she's most proud of a program that she created. It's called Kids, Courts, and Citizenship, and it arranges for about 700 Boston public school kids to visit her courtroom every year. And if I remember correctly, that totaled over 7,000 by the time the program was done. So they visit, they learn about the judicial system, and they learn about alternatives to violence and drugs. And it sounds like a fantastic program, and I hope you get a chance to speak a little bit about it. So we're very excited to have her here this spring, and Lawrence, you'll be here for every Tuesday afternoon. I think we got a schedule out to you hopefully this afternoon. Do we have a schedule for everybody so they know the days and everything? Okay, great. But please welcome Judge Joyce London Ford, our Spring Fellow. Judge?
Thank you. Thank you. It's indeed a pleasure and an honor to be here with you this afternoon. I am here with Kevin Peterson, who is one of our favorite democracy advocates in Massachusetts. And Kevin is the founder and executive director of the New Democracy Coalition, a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization that focuses on civic engagement in Massachusetts and across the nation. The New Democracy Coalition he is in residence at the College for Public and Community Service at the University of Massachusetts. He studied philosophy, politics at Boston University, and is currently a senior fellow at the Center for Collaborative Leadership and affiliated with the Center for African, Caribbean, and Community Development at the University of Massachusetts. He has served as a fellow at Mass Institute of Technology in the Urban Studies Department, and he uses journalism as a means of broadening democracy. And he writes regularly for the newspaper, the Globe and the Herald, and has also written for the Philadelphia Inquirer. And I hope that you will enjoy his presentation today because it focuses on something that I love. And as Mr. Lacey stated, I worked in college for the late Kevin White, who was the mayor of Boston when I was a kid. And I worked for the Speaker of the House, Tip O'Neill. And I worked for Jimmy Carter as a legislative aide. So I've done a lot of things in my life, but I'm most interested in democracy in our country. So let me begin, Kevin, by asking you to focus on politics as a democracy activist and describe what you do.
Thank you. So Lacey, again, thank you for the invitation. Glad to be here. What an iconic structure this is. It was very, very intriguing being here and driving up into onto the campus and seeing this marvelous building. I was bragging to Mr. Lacey about how in Boston we have the Kennedy Presidential Library, and next to it now there's the Kennedy Institute for the Preservation of the Senate. I believe that's both of those are impressive buildings, but no more impressive than this building. Congratulations. I am by default, a democracy activist. I started about 15 years ago doing voter registration in Boston, and over the years we've registered tens of thousands of people, particularly within the minority communities within the city, but even beyond the cities, and cities like Springfield and Worcester and Fall River. And over the years, after college, after serving about a 2-year stint as a journalist for a local community newspaper, I graduated into becoming a democracy activist. And in 2004, I founded the New Democracy Coalition. I was then at Boston University. And the organization was founded on 3 principles. One was civic literacy, the other civic policy, the third electoral justice. Civic literacy being simply imbuing to ordinary citizens, particularly historically disenfranchised citizens, a sense of democracy, a sense of what it means to be engaged as a citizen within a community, within a city, within the Commonwealth, within the nation. So beyond the voter registration stuff, we developed programs that educated young people, high school age people, in a program we call the Democracy Lab. and college-age students, which we founded about 6 years ago with the actor Danny Glover. That focuses on community engagement among college-age students, particularly from the UMass Boston campus. That's our civic literacy. We also focus on what we call civic policy, and there we narrow in around what are the most effective laws, policies that would enliven democracy. One of the things that we worked on over the years has been the renewal of the Voting Rights Act. That happened a few years ago. We're going to talk a little bit more about how it was effectively gutted, but we'll get to that when we do. We've also worked in Boston and in places like Selma, Alabama, around redistricting. So in Massachusetts, for example, a couple of years ago, we increased the number of so-called majority-minority seats, those seats that African Americans or Latinos or Asians could have access to. We increased the number of seats by 100%. It was a historic piece of legislation. And we also are now focusing around issues of voter access through what we call automatic voter registration, and we'll get to that. So that's our civic policy. The third wing of the organization is around electoral justice. And there we simply try to protect people's rights on election day at the polls. So it's that mix of things, civic policy, civic literacy, and electoral justice, that make me a democracy activist.
But Kevin, can you speak a little bit about the Citizen United case? I think people would be very interested in hearing about that ruling in the Supreme Court.
Well, it's a 2010 ruling, but the issue, the Citizens United issue, actually harkens back to, as many of you probably know, the 2008 contest between Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton, and there was an interest by this group called Citizen United. Has anybody heard of it? Okay, so you're aware of it. To televise a program focusing on Hillary Clinton's record, and the program wasn't positive. So the FCC said you can't run it. Then Citizens United came back and said, well, we're going to take you to court. And they took them to court, and they won. And I was about to say upside. The downside of the ruling is, as you know, this unlimited amount of money within our presidential election seasons. And some of you know that Jeb Bush, just this spring, after he aborted his campaign, had raised as much as $100 million of, well, he didn't particularly raise it, but those associated with him, because you can't connect the two. Jeb Bush is not supposed to know what these people are doing in terms of raising money for him, and they can't be coordinated. But it is, to me, as a democracy activist, this ruling is devastating, in that it really corrupts our politics to the extent that there is an undue amount of influence that corporations and some nonprofits and even some unions. I'm a lefty guy, so I'm a kind of a union type of guy. I'm a Democrat. But the extent that even our unions have had
Democrats are lefties?
The extent that they even have on unions have on our politics is disarming. So it is something that we as a nation are still grappling with. There has been no effective challenge at this point in terms of a challenge to the courts. And another route of sort of really getting to the Citizen United piece is it's a constitutional change. And that, as some of you know, as most of you know, is an arduous kind of process to go through. So it has had a devastating impact in our civic economy. I like to use that word, our civic economy. Those ways in which ordinary citizens ought to engage with other citizens in terms of making decisions that range from the community level, from the school board level, to electing a president. And the presence of what's called dark money is a really negative wound on our system.
Do you think we've made, or we've had significant strides with respect to the Voting Rights Act?
Yes, we have, the Voting Rights Act.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, we have. As you know, the Voting Rights Act was enacted in 1965 after a great deal of struggle for decades, particularly by African Americans in the South. There were a number of people who died in the Selma to Montgomery voting rights struggle, and the outcomes of this 1965 Voting Rights Act were tremendous. In 1965, there were only 2 African Americans in Congress. Now there are 46. There were no U.S. senators in the Senate. Now there are 2 African American U.S. senators. And of course, we didn't have a black president in 1965. And we've seen the dramatic impact of the Voting Rights Act in terms of the raw registration of African Americans, particularly in the South. Most people would be surprised that the level of registered voters in Mississippi, for example, African Americans, is higher than white citizens now. So the dramatic impact that this piece of the legislation has had cannot be undercounted. It has transformed Southern politics. It has also transformed our national politics, where we're in some ways a different nation than we are just 50 years ago because of that legislation. I like to say that the Voting Rights Act of 1965 is probably the crown jewel of the civil rights legislation from the 1960s. I can't think of any. You think of the Civil Rights Act, you think of the Fair Housing Act. They don't compare. You think of all the social justice programs that come out of the Johnson administration's Great Society policies. To me, maybe I'm biased, but to me, nothing compares to the impact that the Voting Rights Act has had on this country.
You say you use journalism as an activist. Explain that.
I came out of college. Well, my final year in college, I was telling one of the administrators here, I happened to get a job as a proofwriter for a local newspaper. It really sort of spurred my interest in terms of community development, what happens in the community, and how journalism can have an impact on how people think about certain things within the community. That passion, that understanding has never left me. So even 15, 20 years later, as I have the opportunity to write for some of the local Boston newspapers, I've also had the opportunity to write for some national newspapers, such as the Philadelphia Inquirer. And it allows me to follow an African-American tradition. For example, in Boston, there was a newspaper editor named William Monroe Trotter, who during the abolitionist times used the power of journalism, the power of the print, to impact public policy in terms of where African Americans were in that society. So I followed that tradition. Frederick Douglass was also in that tradition, and many more within the African American community who used journalism to really get down into the masses and explain political change and the importance of advocacy.
How would you generally describe our country's politics today?
Not good. not good, and not necessarily to sound partisan, but I think the Republican debate over the last 6 months or so has really had a negative impact. I think, excuse me, Trump fans. I think his rhetoric, Donald Trump's rhetoric, has really lowered the level of discourse, has coarsened the level of discourse in terms of, particularly in terms of presidential races, where we've always seen, even during primaries, sort of high-level communications around policies. And I think because Donald Trump, I guess, comes from the business community, and that's how they talk.
That's what he says.
And he comes from an entertainment, infotainment community, and that's how they talk. And because he is extraordinarily charismatic, and I venture to say very smart. He has had an extraordinary impact on what's said during the Republican presidential primary and what's not said. And I think, for the most part, that's unfortunate. I think we have a tamer debate, although almost an equally robust debate on the Democratic Party side. That's to be appreciated. But I am generally sort of disappointed in the level of discourse during this campaign so far. Hopefully it gets better. Hopefully.
Does anyone have any questions? Yes.
Well, I would ask if he has any research that would indicate whether we have greater participation because of this level of discourse that's going on right now, and if so, is it better to have greater participation?
Well, informed participation. I think that the presidential Republican primaries is demonstrating that there is more robust participation, particularly from first-time voters or new voters. There hasn't, and it will take a while to sort of really fish this out. But it isn't clear that that the mainstream Republicans, or the establishment, so to speak, are particularly attracted to this race so far. I always say more participation is better, but uninformed participation is it can be dangerous, where you have people voting or supporting ideas that aren't necessarily vetted, and support ideas which have not necessarily been thought about in any kind of deep and substantive way. So there's some danger. We do know so far that voter turnout among Democrats in the primary is lower. Of course, lower than 2008, because that was a historic year, but it's even lower than 2012, which was for the Democrats, a re-election year for President Obama. So it seems to be a tale of two cities just in terms of voter turnout among Republicans or Democrats. Yeah.
Yes.
Those that have some authority and power and ordinary citizens go about educating and informing those who seem willfully uninformed.
Yeah.
Right before you answer that question, I'm just going to hop in here. I have a microphone, and so the people who are watching on the live stream or maybe at home can hear you as well. I'll raise your hand, and you'll be called on, and I'll come to you to speak into the microphone from here on out. And as Bill mentioned at the beginning, this is the first time we've rebranded the discussion group as a discussion group, so we're really interested to the discussion and conversation that's going to ensue. Thanks.
Do you want to?
Do you want to re-ask your question?
My question is, how do you propose, or any ideas about, for those who have some authority or access to media, to inform and educate those who are uninformed, and also those of us who are ordinary citizens, particularly with the caveat that many people do not wish to be informed. They just
I think this sounds like a cliche, but I think it starts with educating our young people, a new generation of citizens and Americans, and the best place to start that is in our public schools. So I propose a national civics curriculum. It's not novel. Other people have done it. And certainly certain school systems within the country do it. Some do it, our private schools do it better than most. But there is a legacy, I think, since the Kennedy administration, where he sort of called for the new idealism, new generation to become more civically minded. There's a dearth of conversation on the national level around calling for more robust citizenship. But I think if it's going to happen, it needs to happen while young people are in elementary school, learning the importance of community within the classroom, for example, and graduating to other more sophisticated forms of citizenship identity. If we don't do that, I think we're still going to just run into problems in this nation in terms of the lack of being informed and the lack of understanding. Like this whole, most of us, I would agree, or most of you would agree, that understanding the Electoral College is no easy thing, right? It's never taught to us. I mean, who's had a class in that? 1, 2, I mean, well, before high school, yeah. Yeah. So it's such a critical aspect of understanding how our president is elected, but we're uninformed even as we graduate from high school. Another incentive, I think, is ensuring that all high school students are graduating as a registered voter, because that gives them, if it doesn't inform them in a real substantive way, it gives them a sense of what they should be doing after high school, right? And that's sort of engaging and making decisions for in their community in the voting booth. There are studies that show that from 18 to 24, a lot of young people are just not engaged. And if we could simply get them registered at high school and give them civic direction, I think that would go a long way. Also, one of the pieces of legislation that I'm working on in Massachusetts is what's called automatic voter registration. Folks heard of that? Mm-hmm. So in Oregon, the law is just going into effect, where just by default, it's called no-fault voter registration also. By default, the state government of Oregon meshes public databases to identify who's turning 18 and who's a citizen. And they automatically register them to vote. Sending a very strong civic message that these young people should be engaged in making decisions in their community. I think that should be a national piece of policy. Why not? And the Oregon law also has this trigger where if you decide that you don't want to be registered to vote for any particular reason, you can opt out. You could sign a piece of paper that says, okay, I don't want to be involved. But at least Oregon is sending a very strong indicator about the importance of self-governance and civic engagement.
Hi. I wanted to say I heard on radio or television fairly recently that 20% of the voters for Trump had not graduated from high school. And also, I think that the book publishers are doing a lot to emphasize certain things and leave out a lot of things, like leave out much on the founding fathers and all like that. I do think that at the elementary level, there has been a lot of involvement in the community and all like that, and teaching the branches of government and all like that. Maybe it's in high school, and I don't know if they still have a high school course required.
In Boston, for example, civics hasn't been taught since 1972 in high school.
Do they call it something else?
They call it high school, otherwise I don't know.
You can set up programs.
Yeah.
If that's something you enjoy doing, working with children, you can set up your own civics program. And
In the absence,
that's what I would say to individuals. Set up your own program. Children love it. They really do love it. They like playing the role of the judge. They like playing, and I was in federal, so it was really amazing. This was an experiment for me to see whether these young people who were in the 5th grade, would appreciate something like this.
Yeah.
They loved being the judge. They loved being the marshal. They loved being the defendant. I didn't like that too much. But you could see the joy on their faces. And I think that's one of the things. Would you agree we ought to start young?
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. Start young and continue throughout high schools. But I also, I agree with you and I disagree with you. I agree with you that we need to be proactive as nothing else is being done, particularly within our public institutions. But I am, at the same time, I'm sort of embarrassed that our public institutions have not been, nationally, have not been charged with the very effort of ensuring that a 5th grader has the experience of voting or going through a process of understanding why he or she should be voting about this, that, or the other. It's a form of civic illiteracy, and I think we need to develop some national policy to respond to it. But I do agree with you. I think the program, your court program, is extraordinary. And there are others across the country, but so many young people miss out on programs such as yours because there aren't recognized comprehensive public programs.
Sorry. In the spirit of discussion, based on what you and Judge Joyce were just talking about, I thought it'd be good to share an experience I went through actually in high school. I participated in a program put on by the American Legion called Boys State.
Boys State.
And they also do one Girls State, and we spent a week down in Manhattan, Kansas at K-State simulating government. And so everyone was assigned a job and an income and all. It was very, very in-depth. And everyone ran for and they were appointed to positions on a city, county, and state level. And there were about 500 of us, and it was an excellent experience that I think more people, if any of you know any junior in high school age students, I would encourage you to send them there, because even the people who were made to go by their parents or their schools and didn't necessarily have any interest in government or community or civics, they enjoyed it, and they have a better understanding of how our system works. And even people who I normally would never agree with, we can have discussions about, 6 years later, we can have discussions about the current political discourse and productive discussions. So I think that's a great program, and I think we should definitely send people to other programs. But I agree, in public education, we need a little civic education. And then, so my question was, building on an earlier question, in your bio it talks about some of your civic literacy and policy programs that you've done in Massachusetts. What have you found to be effective out of those programs?
The most effective aspect of, I mentioned two of them earlier, Democracy Lab and Vote Corps, both are held on university campus. The most effective aspects of those programs are the experiential learning. Getting out into the community to discuss ideas with other civic leaders, for example. Our Democracy Lab incorporates 15 to 18-year-olders. And part of the experience we give them over a 6-week period, and it's a partnership with the city of Boston, actually, and they're paid to be part of the program. So they get a stipend at $150 a week for 4 days a week. And part of their, as I've seen it, their real learning, their growth has been engaging with the local city councilor, engaging with the register of deeds, right? Engaging with the question around what a sequester is on the national level, engaging with professors. So it's the experience of actually interacting with policymakers, even at such a young age, can have an incredible impact. And then sort of connecting them with this idea of policy and how they can be involved in policy change. And sometimes we make that experiential also by assigning them to identify a problem in their local community, in their neighborhood. And it could be as simple as a missing stop sign. It's a cliche, right? But those things happen. Or debris all over the street. And and guiding them through a process where they respond to that problem by either talking to their local city councilors, as we have in Boston, or their state legislators. Once they experience that level of engagement, their sense of citizenship increases. We do pre and post testing evaluation, so we can actually measure some growth or some awareness. Once they have that experience, they see their community, they see themselves in a different way. We impress with them that they may not begin this program as a leader, but by the end of the program, they're going to have a different level of leadership, and they're going to apply it to themselves.
Earlier, you expressed your dissatisfaction with the state of politics from the GOP perspective.
Mm-hmm.
I was just curious, do you have any criticisms or insights for the Democratic side of the primary?
Well, I think I did mention that I'm disappointed around at the level of engagement by unions, which are mostly sort of left-leaning, Democratic, right? And the impact that they're having in our politics in terms of focusing an inordinate amount of money in terms of shaping opinion, to the extent that if I'm a moderate, I might be impressed to go to take another position based on the message that the left-leaning union would put out there, without there being a countervailing kind of education focus around that. So I am left-leaning. I like unions, but I think they are in this era of post-Citizens United decision, court decision, that they are skewing our politics in ways that aren't fair.
The phrase civil economy very early on, and
Civic
economy very early on, and
what does that mean?
Yeah, what does that mean? Can you explain that more in terms of like civil liberties and?
I'm sorry.
In terms of like people's civil liberties and their rights as citizens.
No, it is. It really reflects my idea, and I may have invented the phrase. I may have, but what I mean by it is those things that people do when they effectively engage each other in terms of politics. So there are conversations, right? There are forms of organizing around certain projects. There are decisions that you make around voting. So there are all these things that are captured within our civic life, and I simply call it an economy. They're those things that are very healthy and very effective, and the things that we need, right? Newspapers, for example, are core components of our civic economy because they're vehicles of information exchange. Writing opinions, which is something that I do a lot, is an action within our civic our schools, right? I mentioned that earlier. They are institutions within our civic economy. So it's those things, those mechanisms, those devices, those artifices that are key to our democratic success. So it's a theoretical kind of term, different from civil society, slightly. Did that help? That was? Okay.
Okay. Hi, thanks for coming. And, your comment about, or the woman's comment about Donald Trump having, uneducated voters. Yeah. And, I was thinking, they're probably the best untapped group because they probably rarely vote. So it makes sense to go after them. And as a result, going after them, it's gonna upheave everything. And shouldn't we have kind of a big, like a political revolution every once in a while and change stuff?
That's what Jefferson said, yeah.
I don't really care for the way the government's being run. And I feel kind of powerless. Like, I know that my presidential vote's pretty much diluted in a bunch of different ways because they taught me about the electoral college in school. By the way, I grew up in Chicago. We had civics training, and we were taught to vote twice for Mayor Daley in every election. So I have a lot to unlearn. But, and the same thing about, Martin Luther King did the same thing. He got a bunch of people who were poor and uneducated to vote because, so I kind of see Donald Trump as taking a page out of his book. I know it's not pretty and it's probably not polite to say, but to my mind, it looks like the same sort of strategy.
Yes and no. I think, I guess a more subtle reading of the civil rights history, the modern civil rights history around the voting is that even as African Americans in the South were being prepared for the franchise around the VRA, around the Voting Rights Act, around the Voting Rights Act, even as they were being prepared to take advantage of that new policy, there were organic institutions throughout the South who were educating blacks around what the democracy means, what it means to what citizens. They were called citizen schools. It was a citizen school movement throughout the South. We didn't hear much about it in the North, but in the North it was expressed in different ways. But I think it's slightly different. Not to push back on your thinking entirely in terms of making a comparison to Trump, but I think there is a level of agitating and fostering anger that I see, and this is a premature read, but that's what I see happening among those who are not well educated in this country who are supporting Trump.
Isn't that kind of what you have to do to the populace, though, to get them mad? Kind of remember that movie Network, I'm mad as hell, I'm not going to take it anymore. That gets people out, because it gets them kind of interested.
Yeah.
I don't agree with his message.
Yeah. But see, but so many people who are uneducated misunderstand his position, and it turns into anger. Like we've witnessed some of at the rallies Trump rallies over the last 3 or 4 weeks. I don't think our democracy and democratic engagement should erupt into fistfights. That's taken a little too far. So I wonder. I don't have a deep sense of where the anger comes from, quite frankly, among some of these voters or some of his supporters. It's just fascinating to watch, and I think after time we'll sort of understand it. But it does concern me. It does concern me. But I do get your point. I really do. I really do.
Talking about getting people involved in local politics instead of
That's
just
most
the
important, yeah.
celebrity. So I'm asking what advice you would have for people in the situations where there's as much voter obstruction as there is here. And by way, I'll say that we just returned to Kansas after being away for mostly 10 years, being overseas. And while overseas, we always voted, but we had to prove our citizenship every single year. Coming back, just to try and get a driver's license took my husband 3 trips. He had to prove with his passport he was a citizen. They sent him back and said, we need to see your social security card, which was in the shipment coming across the ocean. They insisted on seeing tax returns, voter registration. Shouldn't happen to anybody. To a Naval Academy graduate, 3 years combat in Vietnam. He's determined that nobody's going to keep him away. But all of that is designed to keep people from voting.
Suppress them, yeah.
So the question is, how do we deal with that in a local level in a state where there are more and more obstructions and blocks being put up? If you have advice, I'd love to hear it.
There's no easy advice. I mean, the advice is really about organizing and pushing back. I mean, the decimation, the gutting of the Voting Rights Act in 2013 really made it easier, as most of you know, for states to really suppress voter registration even more. The voter photo ID laws, for example, in Georgia and in Texas. And then there are, hours after the Voting Rights Act was struck down, and the Section 4 is about a formula that was embedded in the Voting Rights Act. Hours after it was struck down, districts in Texas and Georgia and other states, which had historically been covered by the Voting Rights Act in terms of protections, new laws emerged with that were really about voter suppression. And people have gone at it in different ways. In Pennsylvania, where one of those photo ID laws arose, there were advocacy groups fighting in the courts, and that was overturned in Pennsylvania. But in places like Georgia and North Carolina and other states, it's a matter of continuing to be vigilant about organizing on the state law. Voter registration is not a federal law; it's a state law. So the battle needs to be fought in individual states and county and city and school committee jurisdictions. So vigilance and hard work and advocacy.
By the way, the Pennsylvania law was drafted by our Secretary of State in Kansas.
Is that right?
Yep. We're sorry, but anyway, going back to the civic economy.
Yes.
Economies, senior moment, I didn't get all of them, but the ones that you mentioned, education, newspapers, so on, it struck me as you were saying that those are all being pressured. Those are all in danger right now. Especially, Kansas has a major school issue right now, and you're certainly very aware of.
No, tell me about that.
Oh, way too complicated.
Okay.
Way too complicated. But in terms of schooling, there's problems. And you're certainly aware of the newspaper, accessibility,
Yep.
so on and so forth with that. So, in other words, you're recognizing the value of such things, but those very things that you mentioned are all under pressure.
Yeah, yeah. And that's why I point back to our public institutions as being the bedrock, the foundation of our civic economy. That's an argument that needs to be sustained throughout the country. That's an argument that needs to be put into national policy. I don't see a great push for it at this point, but the other institution I didn't mention were our churches. Robert Putnam, some of you may know about Robert Putnam, talked about bowling alone and the importance of certain institutions, including churches, but also including bowling associations, really reinforce our ability to give to each other and to know each other in ways that make our democracy more functional. So even those institutions, such as bowling, chess clubs, they're fading away. Also has an impact on our civic economy. Putnam says, well, let's focus on those important community-based local institutions so that we build up our civic capital, our social capital more. I think that's what we try to do at New Democracy Coalition in terms of our program. But other organizations across the country also are aware of the importance of lowered social capital and how it's having an impact in our civic economy, and it's a real concern.
Where do you think organized labor will be in our society, the movement, say 10 years down the road? Where
do I imagine it being? Yeah. Well, the labor movement is waning, just in terms of overall size. I think its impact is still disproportionate in a very powerful and influential way. But I believe in labor, collective bargaining, all that sort of stuff. I think that's very important. I would hope that the labor movement is still a significant part of our society, and that it has an impact in terms of workers' rights. I do. Now the political stuff that it does sort of it gives me concern. Collective bargaining, yes. Political advocacy that may be over the top, that's a concern. But
I don't have a question, but I just wanted to make a comment about the issue of voter suppression. The National League of Women Voters and the Kansas State League of Women Voters and the ACLU have filed charges against our Secretary of State for voter suppression.
Yeah. Who's this mean guy? Who's this? Who's Secretary of State? What's his name? Yeah, okay.
He wrote the immigrant suppression SB 17 something in Arizona. SB 1070 in Arizona.
I do know that. I do know that. Wow. Wow.
I just want to know, is there a reason why most public offices are occupied by men?
I can't get it all.
I just want to know why most of the public offices are occupied by men.
Sexism. That's because men aren't that nice to women, and they get in their way. The question was, why are most public offices held by men? By men, and the more important things. right. Right. Well, I do think it would be more than symbolic, and it'll be more, it'll be really important to elect a woman president soon. I think it says a whole lot about a woman's place in politics. It says a whole lot about the level of sensitivity they bring to politics in terms of making policy decisions. They go about it in a different way, in a more sensible way. They don't argue in public like men do, which I never get. I mean, why does the man have to argue in public in order to win the argument? Women go at it differently and more humanely, I think. Yeah.
Thank you very much for being here. I'm very interested in redistricting. Could you talk a little bit about the reforms, specifically principles of the reforms that you brought about in Selma and in Boston on redistricting?
In particular, Massachusetts, redistricting is always seen as kind of an arcane art, and it is kind of an arcane art. As most of you know, redistricting is really about reapportioning political districts that could start at school committee level and go up to a congressional level. And it's ensuring that there are an even amount of people within those districts so that there is fairness across districts. So if the school committee, I'm sorry? Or not. Well, yeah, that's redistricting done the wrong way. It's called gerrymandering, right? So just one principle, one reform is to push against the gerrymandering, where incumbents organize their districts in ways that advantage them. In Massachusetts, the districts on the state level, the state rep level, representative level, and then the state senate level were so gerrymandered racially that it was embarrassing. And our victory was a long time in coming in 2012, because in 2002, our Speaker of the House was ousted from office because he had participated in this racial gerrymandering. So the Justice Department was watching Massachusetts. My friend here, the judge, was watching people. But the principle in Massachusetts was really about racial, adjusting against racial gerrymandering. There are other types of gerrymandering that are partisan. So districts are packed in certain ways that Republicans have advantages across most of our states. So they control the state houses. So they control voter suppression legislation. That's disappointing. And even our congressional seats across the country are districted in such ways that political power is skewed for the Democrats and sometimes for the Republicans. I'm in favor of redistricting committees being run by nonpartisan organizations, not by state committees. Massachusetts, they're run by state committees. I don't know what they're like in Kansas, but it's not a good thing to have legislators organizing districts, because for the most part they're going to organize those districts in their favor. Yeah. So I would push for, if I had my druthers, I would push for a national redistricting committee overseeing our congressional races, so that there's fairness in terms of Democrats in the district, Republicans in a certain district, and so-called racial minorities within districts.
Why did you say no?
Putting all that power in the hands of a committee would be ridiculous. It would quickly become corrupt, in my mind. Should I say it again? Or?
Yeah, say it again.
Here we go for the microphone. Can everybody hear? I think that putting all that power into
Like a national
single-
committee?
Yeah,
national
into a
commission?
national thing is wrong. Now, perhaps to
What if you had, what
to-
if you had 100 people, say in Kansas, and 100 people across every state in the country who reported to a national committee just to ensure that there was fairness? So you have a more, I'm sorry?
Right, and how do we, and how would that much power not corrupt them? You know, how would we know that they are indeed doing their job and that a Democrat is necessarily doing, you know?
See, I would push back the other way and say, what's the alternative?
Well,
We have a completely polarized Congress. That has a lot to do with, our congressional system has a lot to do with polarized districts that were created by state committees. That's the same thing that, you know, I'm pushing for something national and more, and slightly more transparent.
Right, but each time that a state gives up their rights to something like that, they never get that back. They never get that power back, and the federal government just has more and more power. And I'm
So let me
not
ask
real
you the
sure I want
question.
to do
Let me
that.
ask you the question you're asking me in a different way. How do you depolarize Congress?
I don't think that we should. I think that Congress should be kind of a.
To the extent it is now, you're okay with that?
Yeah, you know, I think they should. I think that we should have more debates. You know, but I think if we look back in history, you know, Democrats used to be in power, and everybody, and conservative people were pretty upset about how liberal we were.
Yeah.
And now the shoe's on the other foot.
Right, right.
And in another 30 or 40 years, it's going to swing back. And that's the way our country works.
Okay.
You know, but we should have these kind of debates, and then every once in a while, I think the whole country just sort of gets mad and kicks them all out.
Okay.
I think term limits would be nice.
Term limits?
But I don't think we're going to get them.
Yeah.
Knew that was coming.
I favor term limits in some respects. Boston City Council in particular.
You mentioned earlier that the students in the Boston area, in your part of your program, that they don't understand the electoral college, or students need to understand. I'm just curious, do you think we'll ever go to a one person, one vote?
So.
Instead of having to vote for the electors?
I hope so. I don't know. It's such a standard part of our politics now that a lot of people don't understand it, but it remains. I think one person, one vote is probably the best way to think about electing a president. Go back to the Senate, electing a president.
I wanted to go back to your comments about gerrymandering. What's your opinion on like the practices of like cracking and packing, putting people into
they're neutral terms.
Yeah.
So cracking would be, in some regards, it could be positive because you're breaking up partisan scenarios, right? Right. So if you purposely packed a disproportionate amount of Republicans in a district, suburban districts, right, that sometimes surround a city, right? So you have a conservative, almost like a donut, right, or half a donut. Cracking that would be a good thing. Packing would be, happens in so many municipalities, is putting a whole bunch of minority folks into one district.
Yeah, that's what I was getting more at.
Okay.
Like, what is your opinion about that? Do you think that they would be better served being outside of those groups and able to affect change within, outside of those, or?
Yeah, it really depends on the nature of the political environment within that jurisdiction, for example. This is just hypothetical, it's like Chicago. You can pack a lot of the South Side, you can pack it into a a majority-minority congressional district where it's 82% black. Some can make the argument that, wait, how about making it 52% black and having a significant amount of black people influencing in another district? So they're called influence districts. So they could go either way. It depends on the nature of the political racial nature of the environment, of the geography. So packing and cracking are neutral terms. You want a desired effect that positively impacts democracy more broadly.
So would you encourage one based more on like percentage-wise who's in those districts or who would be in the area based on race? Or would you just want it to be, you want more people of a certain race in a certain area? Or you see where I'm going with my question?
In Boston, where there's been historical sort of political hostilities and racial hostilities, the Irish and the blacks and all that sort of stuff, right? In that scenario, I push for packing because of the historical nature of the intense racial confrontation. I push for packing. In a place like Chicago in the South Side, I might crack the district so that a minority population would have more influence and a suburban population going outside of Chicago. So it really depends for me. You have an opinion?
I do, but I do like to get new ideas regarding the issue. I do believe that people of color shouldn't have to be crammed into one
Packed.
district like 100%, and
Right.
their voice only be heard in that one area.
Right.
Well, like
Right.
the bigger picture is they have no voice because they only have one small vote.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm sympathetic to both of those. Yeah, it depends on where we are. I'm up to my 40th question. I'm enjoying it.
I just had more of a comment. Sort of returning what this gentleman said back here, is that I don't necessarily agree with the idea that putting that kind of power into the hands of a small group of people on a federal or state level would be an
Like a
abusive
national
power.
commission
Right.
on redistricting.
I don't think that'd be an abusive power at all. You look at that exists in a lot of systems. You have the Federal Reserve, which is controlled by a nonpartisan individual with a nonpartisan board that exists and controls the entire Federal Reserve System. You have several other systems, the EPA, every other federal agency, which is controlled by, in some cases, nonpartisan individuals who sit there and they don't abuse their power. That abusive power hasn't occurred, and there are ways to get rid of those individuals if an abusive power does occur. So I think saying that that will happen ignores historical precedent.
And I wonder if our U.S. Supreme Court system is supposed to be nonpartisan.
I think I missed a portion of the conversation when I went to the bathroom, but I don't know if you or the judge expressed how you felt about judicial panels constructing
judicial panels.
Political districts. I know in Kansas recently, after the 2010 census, there was some conflict regarding how the districts were drawn in, and a judicial panel was prepared to weigh in on how they thought it should be constructed fairly. So I didn't know if you all had any thoughts on that. Judge Joyce?
Oh, I haven't done this in a long time. I'm learning. I'm learning.
I think it's a legitimate tool in terms of solving conflicts within certain states. It may not be good for every state, may not work for every state, but I think judges are supposed to be non-partial, right? Impartial. So theoretically, they could be placed at the table using their impartiality to solve matters of redistricting.
And on your nonpartisan boards that you said you would be in favor of handling redistricting, my question was, and I think it was building off what he was trying to get to, in your opinion, what is more
Around cracking and packing?
On packing.
Mhm.
In your opinion, what is more effective, equity or equality when constructing a
You're gonna have to parse
political
out,
district?
You got to parse out the difference in your mind, equity.
Okay,
and equality.
in my mind, if you were to construct political districts based on equality, you just take, here's 40,000 people, here's 40,000 people, here's 40,000 people, and they're your districts. If you take it on equity, I think you take into account underrepresented portions, and you construct it that way in order to provide perhaps more effective representation.
Equity, if that's, equity. Particularly racial equity. Is the history of the United States in terms of constructing political districts is based in racial inequity, where blacks were considered 3/4 of a human being as political districts were being created. That legacy continues 250 years later. You have districts that are Latino, that are disproportionately poorer than other districts. So when you sit down at the table and talk about redrawing these districts as a matter of equity, you got to think about that historical level. The same is true for black districts, African American districts, or where African Americans are populated across the country. You have to look at a legacy of racial inequality that has to be part of how you formulate districts that are in terms of equity. So if I had to push, given the context of the United States and racial legacy, you have to push for equity.
So, do you think that's more gerrymandering than redistricting?
No. It's redistricting with the goal of creating equity. Yeah, that's the goal.
If not, we'll go ahead and conclude the discussion group. We just want to let everybody know that we will be having our next discussion group with Judge Joyce next week at the same time, 4 p.m. right here. I think that's Tuesday, March 29th. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.